All right, so we're Green Team 4, and our presentation is called Dyed Green, Greenwashing and Sustainability Funds. A sustainability fund is an investment fund that markets itself as investing in sustainability and ESG sectors. Greenwashing is the practice of using green and sustainable language without making any meaningful changes or supporting green initiatives. Greenwashing is sustainable in sustainability funds is essentially ESG fraud. We can see an example here with BP's logo over the years. 100 years ago, it looked like an oil company, and now it's this sort of green sun. So we see the stark contrast in these two pictures with the BP's logo and then the disaster of the oil spill in the Gulf. This disaster was caused by unethical motives. Many of these funds talk a good game, but do not live up to their pledges. Truly impactful investing means investing in a very niche companies with a very esoteric technology, which means more risk and potential loss. So these funds end up needing to show returns, so they avoid risk and end up investing in well-known Fortune 500 companies. Here are some examples of the top ESG funds, top portfolio positions, and you see ExxonMobil, Chevron, Microsoft, etc. So moving to some of the big names in the sustainability movement, Al Gore had an estimated net worth of $2 million when he ended his vice presidency, and now he's worth over $300 million. While some of that money was made through other businesses, the bulk of it was made through a sustainability funds and his partnership with David Blood. They call themselves Blood and Gore, and their company GIM invest major investments, as you can see, Amazon, Colgate, eBay, Procter & Gamble, other Fortune 500 companies. The one sustainability or the one renewable energy they did invest in, Solar City, was one of their biggest losing portfolio positions. Another example, Bill Gates has an understanding of the situation, but has failed to inspire others. He's recommended some very esoteric solutions like shooting particulates into the atmosphere to block out the sun. So his efforts don't have an immediate and common sense approach. So when we talk about this issue, the stakeholders involved is pretty much everyone, because we're talking about the environment, but specifically the investors who buy these into these funds. So one of the problems is that the expectations of the consumer, the investor in this case, do not sync up with reality. They think green and sustainable. They think about technology that just doesn't exist. So to put this in perspective, solar and wind are considered the most favorable renewable energies, but as you can see from this graph, solar panels actually take the most in raw materials. This is concrete, steel, glass, etc., whereas nuclear has very little. Also, these technologies can be very dangerous. Wind turbines are very dangerous to wildlife, but also humans. This is a picture of two workers in the Netherlands who died in 2013 as a result of this fire. So alternatively, nuclear has a very bad reputation, but as you can see from this graph over here, it actually has the least amount of deaths compared to like coal, which most of the deaths are air pollution. So the perception is that the thing that the people dislike the most is actually the most efficient. So the problem is that sustainability funds attract money because the investors think that they make money and save the world. But since it's risky and unprofitable to invest in the technologies that are necessary, they just end up investing in more stable companies. So the innovation we need is not getting properly funded.
Yes, so moving on to just looking at these perspectives from using the ethical toolbox. So when we consider the utilitarian perspective, we think about the greatest good that would suggest maintaining the environmental health as long as possible. It would mean investing wisely and addressing the stated need when declaring a fund sustainable or ESG. It would mean the truthfulness of ESG funds does not maximize utility or felicity for all stakeholders. Deontological perspective. deontological. Those that attract investment have a duty to act on the maxim that could be a universal law. Funds must treat each investor as a major asset. If a fund sells on the execution of sustainability, it must pursue the endeavor, even if that means a loss of capital. The virtue ethics perspective, as ESG managers, the attraction is an investment is being a good citizen of the planet. Sustainability is the action plan of those who believe in a spiritual connection with nature. An ESG fund must operate with virtuous motivation. These ethical tools could be utilized to better prepare an ESG fund for market, honesty and transparency in business dealings, a genuine regard for stakeholders, and a duty to fulfill the fund's original mission of sustainability. And next, we will touch on implementing the legal toolbox.
Right. Thanks, Will. So next we're looking at the legal toolbox, and to help guide ethical decision making, there needs to be some sort of legal involvement and implementation to mitigate and resolve these unethical issues within greenwashing and sustainability. So looking at the federal level, Congress needs to be the leader and start enacting legislation that works and is effective. And from the state level, there needs to be state and local government involvement, and they need to insist on competent leadership from the feds while also protecting their unique natural resources. As Charlie pointed out earlier, there's that lack of protection for our natural resources, specifically within the oil industry, and looking to support businesses and investors in sincere sustainability efforts and investments. And then next, looking at the regulatory bodies, the EPA and other similar entities need to make an effort to enforce the law in an authentic way. The SEC specifically needs to work closely with investors to prevent greenwashing and ESG fraud. And lastly, the SEC and similar organizations need to formalize guidelines on what constitutes a sustainability fund and what information needs to be publicly available, including the vision of the fund and its entirety portfolio. And we think that Wall Street should actually address this problem and be involved in this. And lastly, looking at the courts, case law must adapt to innovative greenwashing and enforce the law in a way that protects investors and consumers and to de-incentivize fraud. And lastly, Emilio is going to dive into the next toolbox.
So finally, we're going to talk about implementing the social responsibility toolbox. From the economic perspective, a business's sole social responsibility is to fulfill the economic functions they were designed to serve. So for a sustainability fund, that might mean investing in the most profitable sectors. Investing in controversial sectors such as oil or mining might provide the greatest economic benefit for their investors. Since ESG funds are largely unregulated, the funds can invest in sectors that will see the greatest economic profit as long as they're following sustainable criteria. An alternative way to think about this is that by maximizing their profits, they can use the capital that they gain to invest in new technology that will help improve sustainability. For example, a sustainability fund might argue that by investing 25% of their fund in mining, they can achieve high profits and can use these profits to invest in advancements for sustainability. Next, from the stakeholder model of CSR, the businesses are held to exist and to create value for a range of stakeholders, including the employees, customers, suppliers, and local communities, as well as investors and stockholders. The business operations in sustainability need to consider all stakeholders, which means not only thinking about the stakeholders listed, but also taking the environment and thinking of that as a stakeholder as well. If funds aren't investing in firms that fully respect the environment, like investing in oil or fracking, they are truly operating under the stakeholder perspective. It is important for these ESG funds to balance the ethical interests of all the affected parties, and that includes the environment. Also, investors need to be respected and given all the facts. Sustainability funds should only be working with firms where they can get a clear picture on how they are acting sustainably so that they can relay this information to investors. Finally, sustainability funds must work with firms that respect their workers up and down the supply chain. That means not investing in firms that are exposed to government bonds in countries with poor human rights records like Russia, Thailand, and Turkey. And finally, from the integrated perspective, in this perspective, firms follow the integrated model, which means they fully integrate economic and social goals by bringing social responsibilities into the core of their business model. ESG funds need to be more sensitive to the way that climate change affects people of color. Toxic facilities like coal-fired power plants and incinerators emit mercury, arsenic, lead, and other contaminants into the water, food, and lungs of communities. Many of these same facilities also emit carbon dioxide and methane, which are the number 1 and 2 drivers of climate change. Race, even more than class, is the number 1 indicator for the placement of toxic facilities in the country. And communities of color and low-income communities are often the hardest hit by climate change. Finally, companies can't hide their carbon footprint through outsourcing certain parts of their production process. The old way that investors addressed the poor carbon footprint was often by taking their money out of those companies. Today, divestment is not seen as an optimal way to push for change. Engagement and stewardship by investing and asking for a clear timeline for improvements in things like carbon footprint is a new and better way of thinking about using capital in the ESG space. And finally, we're going to bring it all together and give our final recommendations.
So in order to address the problem, it will require the ethical, legal, and social responsibility toolboxes to work together and achieve a level of synergy whilst compensating for each other's failures. Our final recommendations for managers of sustainability funds to number 1, increase transparency. This means unmasking supply side drivers, which means being honest about why you're starting a fund and what's the motives behind it. Funds should start with educating the consumer, which is the investor in this case, to make sure that they know what their money is going towards, and then correcting the consumers and investors' misconceptions. And then also there needs to be regulation, so the government does play a role. So they need to lobby the government to enact laws to protect investors from ESG fraud. And lastly, using sound financial techniques to allow for increased risk and loss. This means that they need to realize that some of these important technologies are going to be riskier and that many are going to fail, but they need to account for that and still invest in them. Thank you for listening.